All right, guys, welcome to another edition of the Western Bulldogs BigFooty podcast. And tonight we're going to talk about the performance of the team last week. We'll talk about the massive VFL victory. We'll talk about the lineup for this week's game against Essendon, and we'll get our guest tips and all that and more coming up very shortly. Alright, welcome back, and tonight your host is Mike, and in our guest tonight we have Immortal Mike. Welcome back, Immortal Mike.
How you going, guys?
And we have, for the first time appearing, Nathan MJWB54. Welcome,
G'day,
Nathan.
Guys. Thanks, Mike.
Good to have you aboard. What did you guys think about last week's game? I'll start with you, Mike. Give us your thoughts, rundowns, what you saw as the positive, negative, and whether or not the loss is a big concern.
Honestly, I really enjoyed that first quarter. I thought it was the most fluent we looked all year. And that's about it for the positives. The rest was just through the second and third quarter of just missed opportunities and just a hard slog. We couldn't score. We looked stagnant. We looked like we were scared to take the game on for most of the pretty much those middle two quarters. Then we left it way too late to try and do something about it in the last.
All right, and Nathan, your thoughts on last week's game?
Well, I was quite pleased with our ability to hang in there at the end. We basically played two-thirds of footy because, as well as the first and last quarters, the first half of our second quarter was quite good. So it was impressive that we only lost by 9 points after earlier years where we might have been blown away. And it's probably telling me we might be able to chalk up some wins if we can play those four-quarter efforts rather than simply putting in 2.5 quarters as we really have for the last couple of weeks.
But what do you guys think about the matchups? McCartney putting Jones on the back line, putting Jong on Dangerfield, and Jenkins just absolutely tore us a new one with his ability to mark the ball, and putting Stringer onto Podsiadly. Some of those matchups puzzled me because the guys were struggling. For example, I thought Stringer, he tried really well, but Podsiadly is a very experienced player and knew how to use his body and was doing it quite effectively. Putting Jones in the back line really threw me off. I couldn't understand what he was trying to achieve with that. And persisting with Zhong on Dangerfield also, Dangerfield actually started to pick up his game in that second and third quarter. And so I don't think that McCartney made the changes he should have quick enough. What do you guys think on that?
Well, looking at the matchups, I was really disappointed by the fact that we, first of all, didn't select a player that would have kept Jones in the forward line, even though his performance was poor, and McCartney is talking about perhaps shifting players around to give him a better understanding of the game. I think we should be getting to a point where we're not shifting players around from the positions that they should be playing. Midfielders, that's fine when we're talking about pushing Kobe Stevens forward or giving Backman run with roles or Mitchie Wallace a run with role, but we shouldn't be throwing forwards so out of their depth when we're trying to win games of footy.
I actually didn't mind Jones' move to the back line in theory. Let me just say that first, in theory. Mostly because every time I've seen him play in the back line, he's actually played pretty decently. He done it in the Aboriginal game, I think early last year, to really great effect. And I've seen him play a couple of times at centre half back really, really well. But I think it was probably not the greatest decision, considering he was just not at all getting anywhere near the ball. And he was really down on confidence. So to put him in an unfamiliar position and being down on confidence, probably would have been better off just subbing him out, to be honest. Maybe Campbell should have stayed in second thought. Then again, there's always a theory of, we have to get String in the forward line, so someone had to go back. I'm not sure what was supposed to happen there.
Well, I don't know. One would think at this point in time, why would you be playing a player in the back line? And what was clear to me or evident to me was that McCartney was struggling with the height matchup on the back line, and that was pretty clear. Jenkins and Podsiadly were just taking easy marks, and I think that's what he tried. But the problem is that Jones doesn't play a lot of football down there. It's the first time he's been put on the back line, and to put him down there as a key position player to take marks across the half-back line, he struggles with the ability to read the play as it is. To put him in that sort of position where the back line relies on him even more is not a good move, I don't think.
No, particularly when he's, as you said, he does have trouble reading the play up forward, and you're putting him into a position where he's got to worry about his man rather than just getting loose. And he's under the ball and he's trying to read the play, and it's difficult for him. And I think he was thrown to the wolves, to be honest. I mean, I was sitting in the bay and the supporters were booing him, but I think he struggled as you'd expect, to be honest.
Look, I think that was pretty awful that our supporters were booing him. It's not his fault. He didn't ask to get put on the back line. It was I just don't think the matchup decision was thought through very well, and I think it just it exposed our lack of depth and lack of height in the back line, and how reliant we are on guys like Morris and Roughhead.
Yeah, but even beyond that, not giving Fletcher Roberts a chance when he would have provided that dual option as a forward and a back, whereas when we were experimenting with Stringer and later on Jones out of necessity, we did have the option sitting there on the pine in Fletcher Roberts.
Yeah, I know, I agree, and I think it comes across as that McCartney might have been clutching at straws, putting Jones down there because he had no one else.
Well, to be honest, though, I don't think Stringer was much of a experiment for this game, considering he did play a fair bit of defence in the pre-season. So it does actually look like that was a plan early. I'm not sure how good of a plan it is, but it definitely was a plan. So I'm not so sure that it was an experiment per se.
I don't.
But it definitely was.
Yeah, look, I just think Stringer was put on the wrong player.
Yeah, Pods shouldn't have been playing on Pods.
Exactly. He should not have been put on Podsiadly. And
Pods has given better players a bath than Stringer at the moment.
Who was playing on Sloane? Because Sloane had a very good second half too.
To my knowledge, there wasn't a man running with him as such.
Yeah.
That's probably why.
Daniel Cross from last year still, I think.
Yeah, it's the sort of player we'd want in that role, I think. It's where we missed Mitch Wallace, and where I was sort of begging belief that he didn't come back in when we were facing Dangerfield, who we tore to shreds last year.
Yeah, he destroyed them last year. It's funny because there's a thread at the moment on the main board talking about Crowley not being as effective this year. I'm thinking maybe we're being a little bit harsh on Wallace. Maybe it's sort of a league-wide thing. The taggers are just having a bit more trouble nowadays.
Yeah, well, it certainly could be the case because obviously Crowley has struggled and people are talking about Crowley's age now, but I don't think it's a factor because he was outstanding for them in the last 2 seasons, and say what you will about Ryan Crowley, but he was hurting them the other way.
Yeah.
And his form this year has been absolutely abhorrent. So I don't think it's a competition-wide trend because we're still seeing elite midfielders struggle at times. And McAfee, his tactics are questionable, but he's been fantastic on Cochin. I don't know how he's been tonight because I haven't watched the game.
Well, who played on Cochin when we played them?
Wallace.
Yeah. So and he did a reasonable job on Cochin, didn't he?
Yeah, Cochin didn't have a fantastic game. He missed his chances, but that's classic Cochin.
I just don't understand. I don't. It seems to be that they're trying to put Picken back in that role, but Wallace is going to get edged out and find himself struggling to find a position. They need to work out what they want to do with Wallace because I thought they had that down pat last year with his form towards the last half a dozen rounds last year. He killed. He was really running hard. And doing a good job against players like Dangerfield, Kennedy. But I'm not sure. I just don't understand why they're not persisting with him and not giving him an opportunity. The same with Liberatore. I don't know what's going on with Liberatore, but he seems to be struggling. He doesn't have that efficiency or that impact that he was having even at the start of the year. He's obviously not able to shake off the tags, and that's affecting his game.
It's funny. He still had 25 touches and 10 tackles last week, but it just didn't feel like he was playing all that well.
His impact on the game has been minimal compared to 2013.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it was like Boyd's 40 possession games, wasn't it? Really, I mean, he had 40 possessions, but how much of an influence was that actually on the game? That's what we don't want to see, Liberatore. So,
especially because he's actually a deceptively really good kick. It's something that that no one's really picked up on in the mainstream media or really pretty much most footy supporters. But Liv is actually a really good kick over short distances. One of the few players we have that actually kicks to the lead and leads the player to the ball.
Look, I think to his defence, Griffin being injured has been a problem, because that means without Griffin in the first few weeks, Libba was taking the first tags, because they know now they've wised up to Liberatore after last year, seeing how much damage he can do in his disposals, and he would have been first on the list there from the opposition coaches to be nulled out of the game. So, and I think he's still getting the tag because I don't think Griffin is playing at 100%. I still think Griffin's only playing at around 70-80%. He just is slowly easing his way back into it, but is not firing at 100%, that's for sure. All right, we'll move away from that game, and on the good news is that the VFL side, Footscray, had a massive victory last week. I think it's actually nice to see that we're doing far better in the VFL than we were at Williamstown, and Nathan is going to give us a little bit of a rundown as to what happened in that game.
Yeah, well, obviously it was an outstanding victory. We won by 166 points, 214 to 48.
Oh, 166, wow.
Yeah, and it was quite impressive. Clay Smith on return had 35 touches and 3 goals, as well as a number of tackles. And he does look quite underweight after that salmonella scare, and I'm expecting he'll spend some weeks in the VFL putting on some weight before we get him back to AFL level. It's the same tackling, the same intensity. He's just a maniac. Darcy Fort and Jace Perkins among our VFL listed players were quite impressive as well. Darcy Fort kicking 3 goals. I'm not sure if that was his first game for Footscray. And Jace Perkins with 5, who's in that tall, chunky half-forward category, similar to Cramry, but not quite so mobile. So it was quite impressive from AFL players to just the VFL listed boys.
So how did Cordy go in that game?
Cordy didn't have the impact I would have liked up forward, perhaps. I'm unsure of how his ruck work was, but it would be good if he could go forward, and these are the sorts of teams...
was the dominant ruck.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear, and it doesn't surprise me against that quality opposition in the Bendigo Gold. Perhaps going forward, Cordy needs to start making more of a stamp, because he's got the body, he's got the ability to get out in front.
Has he started filling out a bit more now?
No, whereas he lost the ability to go over his shoulders that he was always trying to take chest marks at AFL level, even as recently as last year. But he looks like he's gotten the mobility over his shoulders back.
Right.
But doesn't look to have stacked on too much weight at all. I think that's the sort of player we're looking at. Similarly to Jared Grant, where they can have so many pre-seasons and the arms are still the same size and they're not looking much bigger.
Doesn't hurt Bob Murphy.
No, that's exactly right.
Or Dustin Fletcher, for that matter.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, I thought Grant would have been back playing
80 years?
I don't know. I did think Grant would have been playing back for the reserves last week, but apparently not. He's still a couple of weeks away. So this foot injury of his is, because I can't wait to see him get back into the side and give us that spark that we need on the forward line.
He's indicated he'll be back via the VFL next weekend.
Very good.
So we have missed him. We don't know how he's going to combine with Cramry and Jones up forward, provided Jones lasts that long. But I think he's definitely been a spark we've missed.
Oh, look, I actually think that Grant will actually complement it quite nicely. I think he'll be that second tall forward who can help Jones out and provide another kicking option. He can mark. He's very agile. He does know where the football is and does know how to get to it and create an opportunity. So we've known that. We've seen that. I think one of his best games towards the end of last year is against Carlton. He kicked 4 goals in that game. So we know he has the ability to play, and I think he does have the actual desire to want to play, Grant. So I can't wait to see him get back out there and kicking goals again.
That was impressive, that performance against Carlton, because the intent for the footy was clearly there. But he showcased his range of talents. I mean, he turned Bootsma inside out for his 4th goal. And while you could argue that Josh Bootsman's not a particularly talented player, he worked his way around him. He was taking marks on the fence and kicking with his left foot, and really, really versatile, whereas I think a lot of people were expecting we'd have the forward option of a big lug who's not so mobile but can just take an overhead mark and kick straight. But I think forwards like Grant, when they're on song, are just worth their weight in gold because there's more than one avenue to goal through them.
Yeah, his pace creates space too, and it really helps the other forwards out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very much so, and his I think his intensity towards the end of last year was very consistent through each one of those games. I don't think there was a game that I saw him play after the Essendon match where he was, dropping the head, where he wasn't putting in, where he wasn't hungry for the ball. So I think maybe he might have turned the corner. It's just a shame that he got that foot injury.
Yeah.
But injuries in football players, go hand in hand, and that's what happens. So, who other players had a good game in the VFL and would hope? How did Fletcher Roberts go? I know he's been named as an emergency again this week, so he's not getting a start again unless someone is injured.
Yeah, Fletcher Roberts and Tom Williams were said to be excellent throughout the game and steadied the Dogs inside defensive 50. So there's not a great deal of information available on that, but Fletch has had a few good games in a row now, and you'd have to think he's knocking down the door. If any time he was going to get his chance, it was both Morris and Roughead were injured, and we were short tools against Carlton and Adelaide, and as such we got destroyed by Waite, Henderson, Jenkins, Podsiadly. But you'd have to think he's the next in line, Fletcher, when the opportunity arises.
Well, here's a question. I haven't seen much of Fletcher's gameplay. Look, we know Tom Williams is a good player in the VFL, but suspect in the AFL and the big, in the seniors. And a lot of people just don't think Tom's going to make it. Do you think Fletcher is going to be that player to replace Tom?
Perhaps. It depends what we look at in the first round of this draft. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about the key position talent on offer. There's as much as 10 to 15 of the first round. And it depends what we look at. If we look at a key position defender, which is where I think Fletcher is, that's where he's probably going to fit in, as well as having the option to swing forward. And he's actually quite mobile through the midfield as well, having watched him at Footscray. But he definitely deserves his chance, I think. But it does depend where we go through in the draft, whether a draftee leapfrogs Fletch.
Yeah, I think
I'm one of Fletcher's biggest supporters, to be honest. Like I've watched a good amount of him. Been to a few VFL games. Been to most Footscray games this year. I honestly think he could be anything he wants to be. It's just about how his body develops. I think he's definitely a key defender, but he's kicking so good he could play half forward as well. It just honestly depends on how big he gets.
He is still quite underdeveloped, I suppose, in terms of fitting in at either end of the ground. It's where you'd look at him having that body mass, perhaps playing a third tall role at this stage, but he's got the height and the smarts. He could still mature into even a full-back role.
He's actually pretty good at everything, which is always really, really good to see. So he hasn't got any major deficiencies. It's just whether his body develops and his tank develops, pretty much.
There's a number of players like that in the lineup.
I think we put a little bit too much pressure on a third-year tall. That's all. I think he's still very young. Yeah, they take time, and they really do take time.
Okay. Well, that moves us along to the lineup for this week's game. And looking at the last few games against Essendon, funny enough, on the subject of Grant, we haven't actually beaten Essendon since Grant kicked 6 goals against them back in 2010 in round 22. So let's hope for a reversal of fortunes for that. And looking at the ends this week, Dale Morris makes his way back into the side. Marcus Bontempelli is in, Tom Williams and Jason Johannesson. And out is Gian Siracusa has been dropped, Campbell has been dropped, Jong has been dropped, and Young have all been dropped as well. So probably a little bit surprised with Jer being dropped. Not so surprised. And Campbell, I don't think Campbell was terrible, but I'm not surprised about Jong and Young. I don't think they really had any impact last week. But if we look at the lineups, we've got Picken and Talia and Wood, and Higgins, Morris and Murphy along the back line. How do you guys think Higgins has been coming along the back line? Do you think that's been good or not?
I think he's been quite classy across the back line. It's probably what you don't notice because he's not necessarily extracting the ball, but he's disposing of it well and assisting us in our setup. I think we've been seeing a lot of our play directed through that half-back line through Murphy and Higgins. And Murphy's definitely had more of an impact, but Higgins has added a touch of class back there. I'd probably prefer to have one of those two forward at the very least, but Johannesson was in the VFL. It definitely couldn't hurt to have them back there.
Look, I think with Higgins along that half-back flank, it certainly improves the delivery from out the half-back line and through the centre there, and he can kick. He's probably one of the best kicks in the league, and he'll hit his target. Yeah, I think the only thing...
both feet too.
Exactly, both feet. I think the only thing suspect with Sean being down there is his ability to chase down the man. So, will he chase down his opponent when he hasn't got the ball? And I haven't seen him in too many positions at this particular point in time where he has been in that situation. So he tends to play more of a free roll across that half-back flank, looking for the off from Murphy or Picken or Wood to be able to drive the ball forward, and that's what he was doing last weekend. But it'll be interesting to see. It'll be good now that Morris is back. But certainly I would have hoped to have seen Higgins on the forward line, but maybe, that's what they hoped with Cremery to replace that and put some class back on the half-back line, but I think we'll have to wait and see. Morris is back, which is good news. So hopefully his injury is completely gone. Did he actually play in the twos last week or not?
No, I don't think he did.
No, he didn't.
And we know that Roughhead is still 5 weeks away from that AC dislocation, so probably 5, maybe 6 weeks away realistically.
Yeah. You're not going to rush him back from that.
No. The last thing you want is bad shoulders on a fullback. How did Jason play last week in the twos?
Johannesson, he kicked 4 goals, which was quite impressive because he's necessarily hasn't transferred forward so well so far in his AFL career. We've seen him come forward across the half-forward flank for a couple of goals, but he has managed to sneak through for 4 against the Gold.
Yep.
So again,
apparently he was playing wing as well, so it was just sort of...
Look, yeah, they have been experimenting with a few players in the VFL. Matty Fuller, who's probably earmarked for what you were saying, Mike, about Higgins, where he's getting the off from Murphy and taking off along the wing. That's probably what Fuller's earmarked for, but he was actually playing on ball against the Northern Blues, and I'm not sure what role he played against the Gold, but he didn't have such a good game.
Right. All right. Well, it's certainly going to be interesting because Essendon have a very tall forward line in Joe Danaher and Jake Carlisle, and that's really going to stretch us there.
Having Roughhead would have been ideal with Danaher.
Yeah.
I think Roughhead would have been a immediate starter on Danaher there, and which would have left probably Morris to go on Carlisle. Or even Williams to go on Carlisle, but it's going to be a very, very tough game, that's for sure. Just keep.
I would actually probably put Tardy on Carlisle and Morris on Chapman. I think Dale kills players a little smaller than him and a bit quicker.
And Goddard's back in, of course, so he's back from injury this week, Goddard. So he's another tall player.
Who do you think we look at putting on Michael Hibberd in terms of shutting down?
I'd go Easton Wood.
Defensive drive. Easton Wood on Hibberd.
No, Goddard I was going to say.
Oh, on Goddard, yeah. It depends what sort of role Goddard plays because you just don't know where he slots in on any given day. But those are the players I've got listed as the key for them. I think Goddard, wherever he plays, whether it's across half-back as he has haunted for so many of his 200 games, or through the midfield or half-forward.
Well, Hibberd's starting in the back line with Hooker and Fletcher, so...
Yeah,
but
he actually provides a lot of their rebounding ability, Michael Hibberd, so do we attempt to shut that down because the coast-to-coasts do kill us?
Yeah, I would see probably Picken going on to Hibberd to negate that role.
Even in the forward line, defensive forward. I'm not sure who we'd put on that role. Luke Dalhouse with his tackling can be quite manic, but I'm not sure if he can run with a man all day.
Yeah, and he's a little bit small for Hibberd, isn't he?
Yeah, he might be outmatched by 5 or 10 centimetres actually, which is quite substantial. So
probably why we need Wallace in that position.
Yeah, we need more negating players who can hurt you.
Can't ask for Dylan Addison back for a game, can we?
Oh yeah, rent him for a couple of weeks.
Just rent him for a week. Yeah.
He does hand the ball off to former teammates.
Well, I think one of the problems one of the problems we've seen in the last couple of weeks is obviously with Minson playing the lone hand in the ruck, and our guys or Liberatore not getting first use of the ball, and being able to use that to get the centre clearance. So I think our centre clearances have actually been a lot lower than what they were last year.
But I think that also could be a result, or as many stoppages being generated, with Griffin obviously not at full gear and Liberatore and Minson also down quite a notch. I mean, I haven't looked at the stats, but it was said of us that we were generating a lot of stoppages in 2013, and I'm not sure if clearance numbers could be down because those figures are down. We have been poor regardless, but that could be another
We've been
factor.
really good at uncontested possession, though.
Yeah, we're often up most weeks.
Yeah, which is strange considering last year we couldn't even buy an uncontested possession.
That was where teams would get even with us. We'd get hurt so much on the outside, and the overall possession count wouldn't be altogether too different despite us smashing them in the contested ball.
To be fair, we haven't been smashed at all in contested ball, though. We've pretty much... the only real game we got smashed in was West Coast.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to make of that game, because of every game since, we've been quite competitive.
I've ignored that game entirely. It was just one game that looked like we just didn't come to play for 1 week.
Very true. And you know, I mean, look, Essendon's only 2 wins as well, so they're not travelling that well. So I do really think this game is there for the win. It just really depends on how McCartney matches up, and who he puts on their playmakers, and that's going to be very important that he gets his matchups right with height.
One from left field on Heather. How about someone like Tory Dixon, who's been pushed in the VFL? The reason he was actually put back in the VFL was to focus on his defensive play. So maybe, you never know, it might be a good chance to put him on someone, give him a job, and maybe it can hurt him the other way.
It could be a case, because McCartney said he's not averse to experimenting with players, and we saw that on the weekend with Stringer on Podsiadly. So with Dixon saying he could be looking to improve the defensive aspects, we might see him moved on. I think he's a great offensive weapon. He outbodies players, which is impressive for his size, but in terms of adding another aspect to his game and really cementing his spot, that could be good for him.
Well, what about the interchange? I mean, look, we've got Stringer, we've got Stevens, Hunter, and Johannesson. I think they're more attacking players, except Stringer, who's been used in the back line, and Johannesson, who normally plays along the back line there. So I think we probably will see a number of switches and shuffling on the day. So
yeah, and they've spoken about that, Ash Hansen, in his post Monday reviews, when he's spoken about players, Stringer, Bontempelli, developing versatility around the ground, and I think we'll see more of that. We're going to get smashed by players on particular days, and that'll happen this year. But I'm not sure whether the end is that we come out with more well-rounded players, or we say, well, that hasn't worked, leave him as a forward, or leave him on the ball.
Well, I guess it's better to learn now than to learn if we're challenging finals.
Well, it can't hurt them beyond the day of play, effectively.
Yeah.
So it's worth making that investment, I think.
Well, I guess the point being to that is if you're trying to find positions for players when the team has got a good mix, then you're really struggling with that player. And you're breaking the mould of the team that's gelled together to get to that point. So I guess if you're going to do it and experiment, now is the time to do it. But you don't want to be doing that every week, because it does upset whatever balance is there. So you need to keep some level of consistency in the matchups, or where people play, because that's where they get to learn where people are going to be. They know where the teammates are going to be and where to look for them. And having a new player down there, and Jones was a classic example. Putting him down there, who's never played on the back line in the seniors for as long as I can remember, doesn't know how the back line works. So
no,
I think you've definitely seen it with Roughhead where he's pretty much put him in that spot and left him there. So I don't think the coach is going to be doing that too often, but it's definitely something he's got. It's definitely something he's got in his head about the whole total football mantra that he was talking about, and it's probably going to happen with a few more players than we want and we expect. But it may work out. We never know. Like, I'm taking a bit of a wait and see approach with the whole thing.
All right. Any further comments on that, Nathan?
No, hasn't got too much to add on that.
No. All right. All right, guys. Well, I think that's about close to time wrapping it up for tonight's podcast. So before we do that, let's get the tips. Nathan, what's your tip for the weekend?
Look, I'm going to make a conditional tip. If Bellchambers plays, if he comes in as a late in, Essendon by 21. If he doesn't, Dogs by 3.
All right. And Immortal?
I'm going to go positive this week in the absence of Vital Dread. Dogs by 45 points.
I like it.
Jones and Williams to combine for 10 goals.
We're not talking about the reserves here, Mike.
Yeah.
All right, so 45-point victory for Mike, and 3 points to the Dogs if Bellchambers is not playing, hey?
That's it.
I think it's going to be a close game. I'm not convinced that Essendon are a top team at this point in time. I think they're only marginally better for us, if you could say that, having a bit more depth and better list. But I'll go for the Dogs this weekend by 7 points. Okay, gentlemen. Well, thanks for joining us tonight on another episode of the Western Bulldogs BigFooty podcast. For the rest of you, I hope your weekend is a good one, as is ours, and I hope that the Western Bulldogs can come up victorious tomorrow night. Anyway, we'll see you back soon. Take care and go Doggies. Bye for now.